Hey, good morning, and thank you for joining us here today. My name is Austin. I'm one of the pastors here on staff. Something I've been thinking about and pondering over the last couple weeks is this idea that we live in a digital age, which ultimately means that we are more connected to people all over the world than ever before. We're more connected to people in different states and different cities, to family members maybe that were distant before. We're more intimately in the know about what people think, what they're feeling, how they're reacting to different situations. And while there's both good and bad to that, we can all agree that in some ways, we're more connected than we ever have been before as a society. But at the same time, we are living in a season of COVID, a season that has ignited disconnect, a disconnect from our rhythms and our routines, a disconnect from our friends and family, our loved ones, our acquaintances, maybe even just the people we see in the neighborhood or we see at our favorite restaurants or grocery stores on the regular. We feel a disconnect from our school, or a disconnect from the church or from our small group. We're disconnected right now in the season that we're in, much more than we were before. And while the means of connection may not be the best right now, we as a church are trying to create opportunities to find that connection in this difficult time, this difficult season. And maybe the bandwidth that you have for engaging in relationships is much more limited, which also goes into how we are planning and preparing for these opportunities. We have two opportunities coming up that I want to share with you that I hope spark a sense of connectedness for you. First, if you are new to our church, next week we're going to be hosting a starting point, which is a way for you to get to know a little bit about who we are. It's a way for you to connect in our church, connect to who we are, connect to people in our church, even get deeper connected into what we do. We'd love for you to be at that and to join us there. Also, we have a new season of Hubs coming up starting on February 8th. This will allow you to get connected to different people in different rhythms and for whatever season of life you find yourself in, what the opportunities that you can handle right now with everything going on with your bandwidth. Both of these opportunities you can find out more about at foundrybaltimore.com/this Sunday, and just follow the links there to sign up. Today we're going to be continuing in our series, A Better Kingdom. And throughout the series, we've been looking at different passages of Isaiah, looking at different scriptures that ultimately are pointing to a few different themes that we find in this book. Themes of God's consistency, themes of God longing for us, even when we find ourselves in rebellion, and themes of God continually putting hope in front of us. Today we're going to be introducing a new song to you that kind of speaks on a lot of these themes. If you feel comfortable in your home singing along and joining with us, we invite you to do that. But if you don't feel comfortable, we also just invite you to sit and to listen, and to reflect on the words. Maybe close your eyes and just listen to the words of the song, and to reflect on God's promises that He has made for you and for me.
God of Abraham, you're the God of covenant, of faithful promises. Time and time again, you have proven you do just what you say. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast, and let my heart learn when you speak a word, it will come to pass. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting same, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. God, from age to age, though the earth may pass away, your word remains the same. Your history can prove there is nothing you can't do. You're faithful and true. Though the storms may come and the winds may blow, I'll remain steadfast and let my heart learn when you speak a word, it will come to pass. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting sun, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me down. I put my faith in Jesus, my anchor to the ground, my hope and firm foundation. He'll never let me down. He'll never let me down. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. The rising sun to the setting sun, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me. I'll still bless you in the middle of the storm, in the middle of my trial. I'll still bless you in the middle of the road when I don't know where to go. I'll still bless you in the middle of the storm, in the middle of my trial. I'll still bless you in the middle of the road when I don't know which way to go. Great is your faithfulness to me. Great is your faithfulness to me. From the rising sun to the setting sun, I will praise your name. Great is your faithfulness to me.
Hey, Foundry, as we gather today, we are 46 weeks into the pivots and adaptations that have come as a result of the COVID-19 pandemic. And there's a phrase I've heard more and more as the weeks have gone on. The phrase is COVID fatigue. It goes to explain, in some cases, the physical recovery and response to having a virus and how long it takes to really kind of feel like you're back on your feet. I've heard that phrase used to describe just the tremendous stress that all of us are feeling, just trying to get on with our lives with the sort of the cloud of a pandemic hovering over us. And then I've also heard that phrase used to describe the collective letting of the guard down, to sort of just kind of say, I'm over this, I'm done with this, I'm tired of this. That phrase, COVID fatigue, speaks to a weariness that I think on some level you probably feel, whether it's physical, whether it's existential. And the question you might be asking is, where can I find a little bit of rest? These questions are the same kinds of questions the people that received Isaiah's words were asking. A group of people who had put their trust in civil religion, who had put their trust in kings, who had put their trust in nations and alignments, and none of those things could deliver the weight of what they promised. And so rather than building a best life, they experienced the pain and trauma and of cultures taking them over, of their kingdom falling apart, of kings like King Hezekiah and Uzziah and other kings that we've mentioned, like even when they've done some good things, ultimately letting them down. We're going to jump into Isaiah chapter 40 today. And really, if you want to go to foundrybaltimore.com/this Sunday, you can get kind of the backstory that leads us up to this point. But as we get 40 chapters now into the book of Isaiah, we're going to see two things about this group of people that are true. Number one is that the process of trusting in kings and kingdoms and civil religion has hurt and is going to hurt more. The last time we looked at we saw the Assyrians coming in and really kind of ransacking and creating a great deal of pain. Well, that happened, but things continued to go on a particular way. And as things go on through the first 39 chapters, there's a king named Hezekiah who takes the kind of the reign of things. And when the Assyrians relent and things sort of seem like they're finally in a place of stasis, he just invites the Babylonians in. And when Isaiah goes on to say, hey, that's a bad idea, in chapter 39, verses 5 through 8, you can see kind of the gritty setup of chapter 40. Because basically Isaiah says, hey, you trust the Babylonians, they're going to come and exploit. And Hezekiah basically says, well, that's okay, because it won't be on my time. It's going to be after my life. Okay, cool. I'm going to live my best life. And 150 years later, the city of Jerusalem is in shambles. The temple is destroyed. The Babylonians have taken people captive in a time called the Babylonian exile. This process that Judah has been through has hurt and has continued to hurt as they've continued to place their trust in kings and kingdoms and civil religion that cannot deliver what it promises. And yet, the second thing also holds true, that despite the weariness and the pain that they felt, that God has not forgotten them. Chapter 39, verses 5 through 8 jumps 150 years to chapter 40, verse 1. Isaiah is either looking to the future, or scribes have gone back and have taken his words in chapter 8 and now are living it out and writing it afresh. But look at these words. Comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to Jerusalem and proclaim to her that her hard service has been completed, that her sin has been paid for, and that she has received from the Lord's hand double for all her sins. That God is willing to provide comfort, that God is willing to say, you're still my people, that God is willing to speak tenderly, despite the fact that they've resisted and not listened, and God is still willing to be forgiving and graceful, even when they've been completely undeserving. There is in this chapter a great comfort for a weary, group of people. And as we look at this 40th chapter of Isaiah, which we're only going to be able to look at in part, I want to encourage you to find some time today to hit pause, maybe right now, and read the full of the chapter, or at the conclusion of our time together to go back and read the full chapter, because these words of comfort are so important and so invitational to us who have felt now many weeks of weariness, because it speaks to a people who have experienced years and years and weeks upon weeks upon weeks of weariness with a beautiful invitation. And the invitation for this remnant now, these people who are scattered across Babylon, is to admit their need for ultimate comfort and then to begin that process of receiving it. So I want to jump ahead to verse 21. Verse 21 says, "Do you not know? Have you not heard? Has it not been told to you from the beginning? Have you not understood since the earth was founded? He sits enthroned above the circle of the earth. Its people are like grasshoppers. He stretches out the heavens like a canopy and spreads them out like a tent to live in. He brings princes to naught and reduces the rulers of this world to nothing. No sooner are they planned, no sooner are they sown, no sooner do they take root to the ground than he blows on them and they wither, and a whirlwind sweeps them away like a chaff. To whom will you compare me? Of whom is my equal, says the Holy One. Lift up your eyes and look to the heavens. Who created all these? Who brings out the starry host one by one and calls forth each of them by name? Because of his great power and mighty strength, not one of them is missing." The invitation in chapter 40 to people who have experienced now generations of pain, who are now in Babylon amongst devastation and being scattered and being is to receive the comfort of an ultimate king. Everything we read in Isaiah 40 between verse 3 and what I just read is aiming to kind of set a comparison and contrast between the kings and the kingdoms that Judah has trusted in, and ultimately Yahweh, God, the one who is the ultimate provider of comfort. If you look at verses 3 on of chapter 40, you're going to see these comparisons and contrasts that are going to actually compare God to the Babylonian kings, that are going to compare God to the human kings and princes that people put their trust in. And there's a recurring thing that happens in Israel and in Judah and in the story of the Old Testament, right? That they put their trust in kings and rulers, put their trust in themselves, and it does not deliver what it promises. And once again, as we look here at chapter 40, verse 21, the invitation is to begin to receive, if we want to receive comfort, Judah, that is, and this people that have been scattered, the question for them is okay, to come back to the one who's actually been enthroned. Don't come back to the created kings, don't come back to the created kingdoms that are going to be here for a minute, like the Assyrians, and then they're going to be gone, that are going to be here for a minute, like you were when you were living your best life, and then there's going to be like just the next thing that comes along, but rather to admit that the pathway to ultimate comfort is to trust in a transcendent king, a king who transcends earthly king, a kingdom that transcends earthly kingdoms. The temptation for anyone that's in crisis is to look for just the easiest thing in front of them that will make them feel some sense of okay. And that is the recurring story in the book of Isaiah. And essentially, what the book is inviting Judah to do is to admit that they have trust issues, to admit that they've trusted Egyptians, they've trusted Assyrians, that they've trusted Babylonians, and that none of those things have actually delivered. And it's easy for you and I to look at this in hindsight and go, why would you trust the Assyrians? Why would you trust the Egyptians? Why would you trust the Babylonians? Because we don't feel any of the pressures that came from those respective moments. But here's the deal. You've got Egyptians, you've got Assyrians, you've got Babylonians right now in your life that are calling out to you and are saying, well, if you just trust me, everything's going to be okay. Substances, people, political ideologies and parties, drug, alcohol, pornography, internet subcultures. And what some of these things might actually be able to do, right, is to give us a little bit of relief for a moment, to give us a little bit of power for a moment. They can give our brains a dopamine hit. They can kind of numb us for a minute, but can they ultimately offer the comfort that's being given here in Isaiah 40? Can they provide tenderness? Can they forgive our sin? Can they deliver us from the kings and kingdoms that we feel? Too many times, they instead feel like Psalm 137. This is a psalm that's sort of written as a reflection of trusting in Babylon. It says, by the rivers of Babylon we sat and wept when we remembered Zion. There on the poplars we hung our harps. Their captors asked for our songs. Our tormentors demanded us songs of joy. They said, sing us one of the songs of Zion. How can we sing the songs of the Lord while in a foreign land? If I forget you, Jerusalem, may my right hand forget its skill. May my tongue cling to the roof of my mouth if I do not remember you. If I do not consider Jerusalem my highest joy. What had Babylon done to them? They had tormented. They had manipulated their songs of home, the ways in which they sung of an ultimate hope. And so many of the things we trust in do that very thing. They don't love us. They promise everything to us and then do not deliver the thing that they would promise. They disappoint. Or they're well-intentioned, they're good things, but they have limits. And they ultimately cannot bear the weight of our pain and our trauma. And the invitation here from chapter 40, in this comparison and contrast being offered by the book of Isaiah, is to admit our need for that comfort that Isaiah is speaking about. To admit that we need God with us, that we need the one that's going to emerge from the stump of Jesse, to admit that we need the one who Isaiah is going to go on to foreshadow, who is going to come and forgive sin, that we need that king, that we need that hope. The invitation is not just to admit that, but then to actually begin to receive it. So if I want to read here, I'm going to read here, pick up in verse 27. Why do you complain, Jacob? Why do you say, Israel, my way is hidden from the Lord. My cause is disregarded by my God. Do you not know? Have you not heard? The Lord is the everlasting God, the creator of the ends of the earth. He will not grow weary. His understanding no one can fathom. I want to be really quick here, but here's what's going on. So many times when we read the verses that we're going to read here in just a moment, the chapter 40, verse 31, we'll see them in the context of like internet memes and coffee cups, and we'll just sort of just go on to believe that ultimately that just kind of seeing them and acquainting ourselves with them is supposed to be like, or sharing them rather, is supposed to be some kind of like healing mechanism. And the reality is healing from the pain of everything that's gone on here looks a lot more like that distinction between verses 27 and 28, where there's a group of people going, where are you, God? I don't see you. Like, it feels like you've forgotten us. It feels like you don't care based on the circumstances we're facing. And in verse 28, where they're trying to put back at the forefront of their mind the promise is that God's an everlasting God, the creator God who doesn't grow tired or weary, right? We know that tension probably better than we're willing to admit. that to receive comfort is not just to sort of passively have a set of beliefs about the Bible or God or Jesus and like affirm those things at church a couple of times a year when we feel like dialing in, but rather it's to live in the tension of the pain we're experiencing and the promise that's been delivered to us. That verse 27 and 28 here speak of a tension between my lived circumstance and the questions that I'm asking as a result of this stuff that I've experienced in Babylon, the things that kings and those that have come before us have done, and the things that I'm trying to remind myself about God. The reality is to receive comfort is to actively pursue and push to let that comfort sort of meet us. As Jacob wrestles with God, as Job asks out loud questions about God amongst friends who are scolding him for doing so, we get a picture of what it means to pursue and receive our comfort, right? To take our questions and place them in the framework of the one who is everlasting, the one who is creator, and the one who is promised now, verses 29 through 31, to give strength to the weary and to increase the power of the weak. Because even youths grow tired and weary, and young men stumble and fall. But those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. They will soar on wings like eagles. They will run and not grow weary. They will walk and not be faint. Let me focus on verse 31 for a minute. Those who hope in the Lord will renew their strength. That's ultimately a summary of everything we've just said. That the pathway to comfort is going to be when people proactively hope in the Lord, not in Babylon, not in their pain, not in the medication for their pain, not in the people who say, I'm the escape from their pain, but in the Lord, the one who is the creator. And that process of placing their hope in the Lord is one that is a renewing pathway. It's not just a one-off. It's an invitation for relationship, a constant process to be strengthened. Just as your phone plugs into a wall and sort of charges up again after it's spent a day with you doom scrolling. We're invited to plug back into the source of our hope and be renewed. This is a process that's not passively attained, it's proactively received. That's the journey of faith. That's the journey of hope, to be sure of what we hope for, certain of what we do not see, to proactively push and pursue and to ask questions, but ask questions in light of the character and the nature of God washing over our story. So let me close with the tail end of verse 31. Those that will do that are promised three things. We're told that they'll soar on wings like eagles, that they'll run and not grow weary, and that they'll walk and not be faint. This is not an invitation to have spiritual, sort of superpowers. It's an invitation to experience God's provision, to experience God's endurance, and to experience God's encouragement. And I'll be very quick on these things, but I want to explain them. To soar on wings like eagles, right? As you look to nature, you see that the eagles live a longer life. That's some of the reference here. You see sometimes the idea of a bird in nature kind of giving something else a ride on its back. It's that its strength and its efforts are carrying other objects, other creatures. But then you also see the process of fledging. When a bird is learning to fly, this is what happens with an eagle, where over a course of time, a bird who's it's learning to fly, and eagles as it's learning to fly is shown by its parents. The process of flapping his wings and is given that opportunity to kind of jump branch to branch and practice that, but is ultimately kind of sent out to learn that process. And along the way, the parent eagle gives and provides a level of provision appropriate for that moment. To soar on the wings of eagles might mean that you're in a moment where it feels like God's carrying you on God's back, but it may also feel like I just have just enough provision for what I need right now to sort of feel like I'm sustained through the day. To run and not grow weary is to speak of a level of endurance, right? There's an episode of The Office where the main character, the show's protagonist, Michael Scott, is hosting a charity run, and he wants to win the charity run. And so he takes all of the things that like would set you up to do that well, to eat carbs and to set up a water station, but basically abuses his relationship with any of those things. And so they don't actually help him win. He doesn't carbo load at the right time. He eats fettuccine Alfredo in the swell of the heat right before he runs. He bypasses the water station entirely. And spoiler alert, he does not win the race. To experience the endurance that comes from God is to take the resources God has entrusted us, the opportunity to pray, the opportunity to be edified by God's word, the opportunity to live on the daily bread that comes from God, and to let that resource us over the course of time, right? Because anyone that runs a race knows that there's moments where they do in fact get tired, but they're fueled and they're carrying that tension and that weight properly. And so we have all kinds of resources to us, right? Prayer, scripture, streaming church, joining a hub, good community that will help us grow encouraged versus increasingly cynical. May we maybe fuel ourselves properly for and receive endurance for the race ahead. And then lastly, encouragement, that they will walk and not be faint. You know, I think sometimes in life you're going to feel like you're running, and sometimes it feels like all you can do is just keep walking, right? You just get weary and you don't have the strength to soar and you don't have the strength to run. And this is where so many of us are now. We're just kind of putting one foot in front of the other. And then the promise here of Scripture is not a life devoid of trouble or tragedy or pain or painful circumstances or even feeling the sting or consequences of our sin, but a God who will renew us, will give us the strength to keep walking, to give us, as Tony Evans says, Dr. Tony Evans says, just spiritual encouragement and nourishment to keep on going, right? And so may you receive that encouragement today, but may you also commit yourself to being that voice of encouragement today, that you might look out for today, people who might be walking and are feeling a sense of being faint, so that your words could breathe courage to keep going. Today, the invitation, whether you're flying, running, or walking, is to receive a renewed sense of God's comfort and hope. May you walk in that today. May you admit your need by confessing your trust issues and the things we've placed trust in that cannot deliver what they promise. And may we walk in that ultimate comfort of God's hope and peace and grace and mercy that we find in Jesus.
As we think about what we've heard today, let's take a moment together, take a deep breath, and quiet our minds. It's been 46 weeks, and we are tired. Our fatigue is cumulative, but right now, what is weighing heaviest on you? What are you carrying this week that frustrates and fatigues you most? If you can, go ahead and name it. Tell it to God, who promises to listen to us. Scott talked today about how the people of Judah put their trust in kings, politics, civil religion, even themselves, only to be let down in pretty crushing ways. Is there something you've been trusting in that you realize can't bear the weight of that trust? Has it given you trust issues like Scott talked about? Who or what has let you down? If you can, name it. Confession is a healing practice. Sometimes when we're weary and disappointed, we imagine God feels that way too, that He's as frustrated with us as we are with ourselves and others. How does it feel then? What does it mean to you to hear a tender voice when you are expecting a rebuke? Let's meditate on the tenderness of God's voice in Scott's message today. Comfort, comfort my people, says your God. Speak tenderly to them. Now take a minute to admit to God your need for comfort, your need for a break, for rest, for a light and a path through this darkness, for a better kingdom than this one. In your own words, tell Him what you need. Think now of how strange, how wonderful it is that God Himself is the answer, that He Himself is our comfort, our rest, our light, our path, and our way through this. He is a better King, one that never grows tired or weary, one who keeps His promises. And He promises to give strength to the weak, to give wisdom to those who ask, encouragement for those who are losing heart, rest for those who are weary and heavy laden. Let's end by praying this together. Lord, teach us to run to You again and again for this comfort. Help us to live in the tension of being ever drained of our strength, ever renewed with Yours. Help us not to be confused or discouraged by this phenomenon that we leak and are constantly needing to be refilled. And Lord, help us to be Your tender voice of encouragement this week to someone who sorely needs it as much as we do. We ask these things in Your name. Amen.
As we continue to reflect on that prayer that Katie just led us through, I invite you to take a moment and to consider this and to consider what you just prayed for, what Scott talked about today, in light of Jesus and the cross and sacrifice that He made for you. For the next few minutes, we're going to participate in communion, and I invite you to do that with us. Hey, thanks so much for being here with us today. We're grateful that you joined us. Here at the Foundry, we believe that one of the ways that we worship God is through our generosity. And when you give here at the Foundry, you create this digital experience. You create a safe space in the age of COVID for people to engage with Jesus online. You also create a safe space for people who may not know Jesus or who are experiencing Jesus for the first time or questioning Jesus to come and to wrestle with who he is right now digitally, but also at some point in person. If you want to be a part of this and you want to give here at the Foundry, you can do that by heading over to foundrybaltimore.com/give. Now, as we conclude, I want to pray this last verse as a benediction for us today. May you soar on wings like eagles this week. May you run and not grow weary. And may you walk and not be faint. Amen. Have a great week. We hope you join us next week as we continue our series.